good afternoon and welcome back everyone. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and breakout sessions. Now we're going to delve into the second part of today's theme, which is the future of work and to what extent that means working from home. Nicholas Bloom, professor of economics at Stanford, is not only a well-renowned researcher on management practices, he's also a leading expert on remote work, and he's actually a pioneer in the field and started doing research on this topic as early as 2004. So you can imagine that he started getting a lot of calls back in 2020 when the rest of us started figuring out this thing called Zoom. What's the current state of working from home? How can hybrid and remote work be managed? And how does remote work affect productivity, employees, company culture, and profitability? That's what we will be discussing in this afternoon session. And we'll start off again with the presentation from Professor Nicholas Bloom, and then be joined by Katarina Berg, who is Chief Human Resources Officer at Spotify, and Hanna Fager, the Chief People Officer at Volvo Cars. We're so happy that you're all here. So help me welcome Nick back on stage.
Thank you, Gabriela. I'm looking forward to the panel session as well. The last 3 years has been totally different for me. Been very much. I mean, it's great talking to folks. Actually, real estate and HR, a massive amount of discussion. In fact, increasingly, I think real estate is now sitting under HR. Actually, interestingly, in a lot of companies. So why don't I'm going to talk about the future of work from home. Firstly, as mentioned, I started working this in 2004. It was very quiet. It was like hard to get anyone interested. I did get to meet President Obama, which was fantastic. He's super impressive in person. I mean, I could talk about this later. He's super impressive in person. Off the cameras, it was really great. But to be honest, not much happened until March 2020, in which case things went kind of crazy. Since that time, I've been spending a lot of time collecting data. So I'm going to be very data focused, and then with some anecdote. I've probably by now spoken to like 1,000+ managers just from doing a lot of exec head talking to firms. In fact, there's a great prelude this morning. A lot of the more interesting research questions come up. And there's a number of times that companies have asked stuff, and I'm like, I don't know. That's a really great question. In fact, someone emailed me something earlier in the week, and it's like, we'll probably put a question in next month's survey. So I'll do 3 things today. One, I'll just give you data. I'm apologize, it'll be somewhat US focused. I'll try and span. I just have the best data on the US. The US looks, from what I can see on other metrics, very similar to the UK, Sweden, much of Northern Europe. So I don't think it's particularly misleading, but I'll show you some Swedish data. I don't have any Swedish interviewers and no Swedish US marriages, unfortunately, in this data. And then I'll talk about managing hybrid and remote. And then I'll talk about 3, I think it might be 2 actually, because of time impacts on the economy. So here is a data set. There's various ways to measure it. My preferred measure is share of full days that are work from home. The reason is, I know lots of people used to work from home in mornings and evenings pre-pandemic and still do. We care about full days because it affects commuting and office space. And so if you look before the pandemic in the US, probably the same. I know the UK, I'm pretty sure Sweden it's about 5%. It's not very common. So some people did work from home. There's not a lot of it. During the pandemic, your experience would have been somewhat different because we had a much more aggressive lockdown, but it went up to about 60%. Same in the UK. Basically, anyone that could work from home was working from home pretty much full time. The first phase is the drop. That kept dropping until about the end of 2022. So the pandemic slowly wanes. Blue is our data. So we've been surveying 10,000 Americans a month in a survey called SWAY. Red is the federal government, is the census. They survey about 40,000 a month. You notice the overlap. The government got that at scale, but just took a long time to get there. We kind of align. The third phase to note now is from 2023 onwards, it's flat. So there just has not been, I in fact put in an editorial piece in the New York Times on Monday saying the return to office is over. So it is totally flat. At the top is data from Castle, it's swipe card data. So how many people are swiping in and out on offices as a share of Feb 2020, that dropped a lot. It's gone up. It's flattened in the US at about 50%. So for anyone that's thinking we're all going to go back to the office, we're not at this point. This is on aggregate the new normal. Some firms are going back, but just as many seem to be moving out. And I'm happy to discuss it in the Q&A, but it wasn't obvious, but by now we've had 9-10 months of it. And I think at this point, transit data, driving data, I mean, there's even data on from a company that makes, I don't know where this came from, but in the US, there's a lot of those water cooler things. How many of those big water cooler things you deliver into offices, even that has gone flat. So everything looks like it's flat from 2023 onwards. Here is international. So we have a different data with a team that's out of Germany, oddly enough, Mexico, and the UK, collecting data across countries. We surveyed countries and just we got the data and it wasn't really obvious how to organize countries and by blocks. Initially we thought like OECD, non-OECD, rich, poor, north, south. In the end, what you kind of see is the most natural ordering is by English speaking. I'm not entirely sure why, but actually, to be honest, we have some hypothesis, but for some reason, English speaking countries tend to have the highest levels of work from home. So US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, pretty high. Europe is then the next highest block, with Sweden towards the upper end. It doesn't surprise me. Sweden's, well educated, it's relatively service orientated, it's pretty decentralized, it's kind of high trust, but Sweden's towards the upper end. You notice that Southern Central America is kind of lower still, and then Asia's the lowest. So we see this cross-country ranking. If you look in office occupancy, so this is a different data set from JLL, a very similar story. So offices are only half full in the Americas here. They're about 3/4 full in the Europes versus pre-pandemic. Here's Sweden. Stockholm, I mean, this is from a company that sells office space. What they call normal is 90% plus. This is pretty optimistic. High is 75 to 90% of pre-pandemic. Sweden is high, but I would call that frankly low. I would call that low, very low, really, really low. But anyway, this is like as a share of pre-pandemic. So Sweden, looking is between 75, 80% of pre-pandemic office occupancy. So Sweden looks like the UK, looks like the US. It's clear that we've got much higher levels of work from home versus pre-pandemic. One huge point to make is most people can't work from home. So this is US data again, but again, it's going to be very similar across the whole of Northern Europe. About 60% of people can't work from home. So who are they? They're basically frontline employees. So the people that brought the food or clean the room afterwards. I'm staying in a hotel, the people that run the hotel manufacturer, and the Volvo car plant, all of these folks cannot work from home. That's actually the majority. There's then 30%, there's probably pretty much people in this room that's hybrid. So that's, if I think of my students and my MBAs at Stanford, they fall into that group. And then there's the final 10% of the fully remote. This group are some high-end coders, but the majority of them by headcount are actually things like IT support, call centers, data entry, etc. This group actually isn't that well paid. There's some, there'll be some Spotify, some Airbnb folks, but mostly actually this is lower paid people. So typically hybrid is the highest paid people. And I do a lot of exec ed. It's always had to do with hybrid. Hybrid is the headache for companies. They're actually really struggling on that. So here's the figure, which the one on the left, I think this is the most amazing graph out of everything here. So this initially doesn't seem that obvious. I'll just go through what this is. This A for, nerds and economists, this y-axis is on a log scale, which is why this is a straight line, and it's the share of sales that's online. So in the US, it's the share of online sales. You notice it's going almost a perfectly straight line. So this was growing at a pretty constant rate up until the beginning of the pandemic. This is, Amazon, Instacart, Airbnb, all of this online sales. During the pandemic, it jumps up. Again, no surprise, everyone, we at home, we ordered everything online and used a lot of Instacart because of lockdown, you couldn't literally go out and shop. And then this thing drops back down. What is amazing is it's back to trend. Like if you're an alien and had left the Earth for 3 years and come back, saw that point and saw everything, you'd go, yeah, like nothing's happened. If you took the pandemic out, and it's not just this. So if you look at open table bookings for eating out, totally back to trend. If you look at flights, airports, they're totally back to pre-pandemic levels. If you look at attendance at like Premier League or NFL games or Champions, anything else, totally, like huge chunks of the economy just completely back to pre-pandemic. The one thing that is a complete discontinuity is work from home and stuff that's upstream and downstream. So this looks like it's one of the big changes in the pandemic. I think it's permanent. I mean, everything we've seen out at this point, it is permanently different. It is not going back. It's dying out. I occasionally speak to people in real estate that own a lot of office buildings in the center of cities. They're like, no, we're going back. I'm like, there was some event. We had a remote work conference for 3 days. there's all on recording. I don't know if anyone listened to it, but there was like at the end, there was a question from someone in the real estate industry at the back. And she said, if we do go back, and everyone's like, I'm not sure, I don't think that's happening. But this, this is so striking that everything else has returned. We're now totally, post-pandemic, except work from home, which I think is because this is the post-pandemic normal. In fact, we ran a survey of 500 US execs. We wrote up a piece in the Harvard Business Review, like a blog piece. We asked them what was work from home 5 years ago now and predicting 5 years from now. The most interesting is predicted. You notice that the levels of hybrid and levels of virtual work from home for 500 US execs is slightly higher than they are now. So I think everyone's pretty much on the same line. Where we are now is actually gradually going to rise. There is no return to office anymore. We're at peak office. Office space is declining going forwards. Here's the industry breakdown. Massive variation. So Spotify, in terms of tech, would be right at the top. That's in the odd way my world. I live in Silicon Valley. I was saying this over dinner last night. My kids' friends' parents are basically university tech, VC. It's a very, it's a very non-representative sample, but everyone there is kind of tech. Finance, insurance is pretty high. The business service, these are high-paid industries with lots of people on the computers, and therefore it's naturally remote. If you go down to the other end, Volvo, I guess manufacturing, retail, transport, warehousing, these are industries where there's a lot of face-to-face activity or dealing with customers. What I find when you talk to execs in these industries is, even though they're very senior, they could be working from home. They tend not to be because they need to connect with their people. So I remember talking to someone that ran a construction business, and she was saying, look, I could be at home, but the front line has to go in every day. The managers have to go in every day. So I tend to go in 3-4 days a week because it just feels disconnected. So that's why there's a lot of variation. We look at gender. On gender, there isn't an enormous variation. There's some, but it's not huge. You can see both men and women saw a big pickup and a drop back. Where there's a huge spread in the data is by education, and ultimately by income. So work from home is basically an educated, wealthier person's thing. And going into the office 5 days a week is, not the office actually, the workplace, it should be clear. Only about half the people work in offices, about 45%, 55% of people work in schools, hospitals, factories, etc. So this is where the enormous divide is. And in fact, if you ask, a lot of managers said there's been real kind of anger and upsetness over frontline staff don't get it. They're getting paid low amounts. They also don't get to work from home. And maybe we'll come up to talk about this later, but it's generated some inequality issues. There's also some variation of a life cycle. So if you look at 20-somethings, they basically have lower work from home levels. They're not that keen on it. They're often single, want to go in, want to socialize in the office. They want to get mentored a lot. Also, if you look at these folks, so this, I was talking to one of my students, and she was like, there's 5 of us in the summer in this apartment. Like, where am I going to work from home? Like, I don't want to spend all day in my bedroom. It's like being in a prison cell. So like all night and all day. So I want to go in the living room, but I can't do that because, my housemates will come in and out. So you see 20-somethings have pretty low levels. It goes up in early to mid 30s and 40s where people tend to have young kids, and then tends to drop back down again. And like top of firm CEOs tend to be quite low. But you see this U-shape. So that's the data. Why has it settled down this way? So the 4 things that people raise as driving it. Number 1 is by far the biggest one, is basically keeping employees happy, recruitment and retention. So I'll go through and give you some data on this. But when I talk to companies, that's what's driving it. The reason I have work from home, the reason we have hybrid is to keep people happy and for recruitment and retention. So firstly, just to put one number on it, we've surveyed tens of thousands of people, including, probably should put the Swedish number, but the Swedish number looks very similar to the British, to the French. They all look very similar. People report work from home is equivalent to about an 8% pay increase, the ability to work from home 2-3 days a week. So in fact, there's a paper by Alex Mass and Mandy Pillay back in the AAR in 2017 that does an experiment, comes up with that number from a completely different way. So I kind of pretty much believe this number. Where does that come from? Why 8%? Well, one big thing is if you work from home, you don't have to commute. There's a very famous paper by Danny Kammerman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics about 10 years ago, that came out in Science in 2004 that does evaluation of activities by hour on what people like and dislike. The second most hated activity per hour is work. I mean, that's why you pay people to do it. Otherwise, they do it for free. Turns out the most hated activity per hour of all is commuting. People hate it even more than working. And so like working from home saves you, 2-3 days a week of commute, plus you can live further away. And so I don't know, some people think 8% is a lot, others don't. But I mean, this turns out to be the average. Another way to look at it is this experiment. So at Trip.com, which is one of the world's big 3 travel agents. So there's Expedia, Booking, and Trip. So Trip's slightly more Asia focused, but you probably use Trip. But I mean, I get, if you go into Google and just search flight to, Paris, it'll come, Trip will be one of the things that comes up. So their founding CEO, now chairman, James Liang, was in my class at Stanford about 15 years ago. And I know their current CEO, Jane's son, and between them, we managed to set up this experiment. So we took 2 divisions, and these are all graduates, about a third of them are postgrads. You should think of them of like, elite undergrads that have gone on to work for one of China's, but it would be like Spotify. It would be almost exactly like the graduate employee. This is a very prestigious employer. These are very high flying, people in the firm. They're doing coding, marketing, finance, and got some accounting stuff. So these are kind of graduate jobs. They randomized them by half of them. Those with even birthdays. So if you were born on the 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th, 10th of the month, you came in 5 days a week. And if you had an odd birthday, so you're born on the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, and the 9th of the month, etc., you got to work from home Wednesday and Friday. They basically copied the Apple plan and just randomized it by even and odd birthday and ran that for 6 months. What did they find? They found absolutely no effect on performance whatsoever. They had loads of data, so lines of code written, promotions, performance reviews, the transcripts that we did in natural language. You just couldn't find anything whatsoever across any dimension. So there was it was positive at the point estimate, but very small. So I would say it was 0 to plus 2%. So there's no performance effect, but quit rates went down by 33%. So when the board looked at it, they're like, there's no negative on performance. If anything, it's slightly positive. We maybe saved space. They didn't bother to set it up that way, but you could stagger the days. But it was clear that employees like it. They estimate it cost something like $10,000 every person that quit from retraining, so they just rolled it out. So this is another way of looking at it. It's either 8% or potentially reduces quit rates by 30-40%. So that's the big driver. Then the question I get asked a lot, and it comes up all the time, is, well, okay, so employees like it, doesn't it damage productivity? So here it's a bit more involved, and there's 2 different flavors, and why don't I go through them? Let's start with hybrid, because I just talked about this a minute ago. So there are a number of studies now looking at hybrid. So the classic hybrid may be Monday, Friday, I'm working from home. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're all coming in the office, having meetings, presentations. We kind of try and anchor on those 3 days. That looks like it has honestly no effect on productivity. It's maybe even positive. You're kind of surprised why, people say, well, there's 2 less days a week of FaceTime. Yes, there's 2 days less a week of FaceTime. Maybe that's bad. But on the other hand, people save a lot of time. And it's also typically quieter at home. And so net, those tend to net out on each other. The effect on fully remote is more contentious. So there's a number of papers that look at fully remote. So to be clear, this means working from home 5 days a week, week in, week out. Here, the evidence, there's quite a few papers that come out. That goes anything from minus 30% to plus 13. The average is about minus 10%. So why is there such a big spread? The reason there's such a big spread is it depends on how well you manage it. So if you send everyone home at the beginning of the pandemic with no warning, with no training, without any good control systems, you can easily get minus 30-40%. These are people that are just not set up to do it. You're not trained. You don't have performance evaluation systems. You can get up to kind of 0, maybe even positive if it's well organized. You have retreats you meet every 6 to 8 weeks. So this is kind of sensitive to how you manage it. The other thing to point out is I think productivity is the wrong question to ask about these jobs. The big question is profitability, which is ultimately what companies care about. So imagine I take the average minus 10%. Imagine I just say, look, I concede it's maybe reduces productivity. It doesn't have to, it can be well managed, but let's say I concede it's minus 10%. Initially you think, well, doesn't that mean we should never have fully remote? The issue is you save an office space, which saves about 10 to 20% on costs. And B, you can hire people either nationally or globally, which, if you're in Silicon Valley or in Stockholm, that's, potentially 10, 20, 30%. So fully remote turns out to be very profitable, even if it potentially reduces productivity. So to give you an example, Stanford has 20,000 employees. about 1,000 are fully remote. Why? Because they cost half the amount. And maybe they're 10 or 20% less productive. They're definitely more than 50% less productive. So for us, it's hugely efficient. Hybrid is about flat to slightly positive, but dramatically reduces turnover. So it also turns out to be profitable. And as a result, this is incredibly common. There's very few large firms, or some firms full stop, that for professionals and managers don't do at least one of these two. The other thing I was going to mention on hybrid, on work from home, it saves time not only for commute, but it also saves time on grooming. So we have some grooming data. Turns out people save about 10 minutes a day. I'm not sure which is more horrible, the blue or the red bar. So if you look at this, like, I don't know, brush their teeth. Like, you know, only 95% of people brush their teeth when they come to work. I don't know, 5%, you know, there's one person in this room at least statistically, you know, it's like, I think the 5% missing, but you can see here when people work from home, they save about another 10 minutes. It's more debatable whether that's a good or, you know, bad thing, but this is part of the time saving. So for employers, their employees save about 70 minutes a day when they work from home each day. It looks like from time use, they spend maybe 30 minutes more working. So this is why the productivity effect can easily be positive. People are like, well, they're goofing off, they're sleeping. And we just don't see that in the data. On an average, productivity numbers look slightly positive. What about space? Space is the big disappointment. So there just hasn't been a lot of space saving. It's really interesting. It's changed a lot. So when I used to talk to companies back in 2010, 2015, so I did a randomized control trial with a company back in 2010 on work from home. And it was all about saving space. The idea back then was just shut the office, people go fully remote. Nowadays, it's mainly about hybrid, and most people are coming in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And so it's actually turned out to be quite hard to save. But the journalist, as she hit Sarah, she hit. Yeah. You're one of, we're just saying, it's one of the few times organizations that's managed to reduce space by hybrid, but by scheduling the days, different teams come in. I was saying, I mean, that was a very rare thing. So mostly people do hybrid. They either say the whole company comes in on these 3 days, or they let the teams choose, and the teams typically will choose Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So most organizations I speak to are saying, look, space costs are not a big deal. I'd rather have people happy and stuff productive. In the long run, I don't think that's going to be true, but for now, they haven't saved a lot on space. And then wages, you can potentially save on some wage bill, mainly because if you're hybrid, you can hire people a bit further away. So imagine if you're, you know, Stockholm, if people are only coming in 2 days a week, they can live 2 hours away. And so you can just have a bigger radius and go to, you know, lower cost suburbs. If they're fully remote, you can go to other countries. So this is part of a research paper based on Upwork. They've taken millions of job postings on Upwork and looked at exactly the same job. So someone doing Java, you know, plus with 6 years of experience, having done this stuff before, etc. How much does it cost? Benchmark to one is the US. You notice in, you know, Pakistan, India, etc. That's like a third. So you can see why this is hugely appealing. These people may not, you know, they may be slightly less productive. There's no way they're 1/3 the productivity. And so it turns out you save on wage bill. So when I come to it, when I talk to, I mean, this isn't that surprising, but if you look at fully in person for managers and professionals, as in people that can work from home. So again, excluding frontline staff that have to come in, for people that have the option and can easily work from home, fully in person, as in forcing people in 5 days a week, is now very rare. Why? Because it's hard to justify it. You know, you have a smaller recruitment radius. You don't particularly save, or, you know, you're paying more on rent. Productivity, if anything, is lower, and it really pisses off employers. And so you basically have to pay them more. These two are where everyone's landing on either hybrid, let's say come in 3-4 days a week, or fully remote. This thing probably does maybe lowers productivity, but has some big cost savings. It's not a, you know, we can come into the Q&A. This, you know, this is much better for mentoring. So it depends on your organization. If you have a lot of 20-somethings, I probably have them come in 3-4 days a week. If you have a lot of, you know, 30-40-year-olds that are very experienced and maybe they're doing more individualistic tasks, maybe have them remote and they meet up for retreats every 4 to 6 weeks. The thing that I would avoid doing, where I see companies getting in trouble, is being on what I call the off diagonal. So there's kind of two strategies: either pay for an office and pay high, let's say New York or San Francisco or Stockholm salaries, and have people come in 3 days a week. So you're paying a lot of money for space, and you're paying a lot of money to have people and being able to live in central Stockholm, but then have them come in. Or get rid of the office, and hire people nationally or globally. And then that's kind of the lower cost remote structure. The thing you don't want to be is where Zoom was, for example, for a while. They had the office, they're hiring people in San Jose, but then no one was coming in. And it's like, why would you're paying a lot of money not to do anything? So just be on the diagonal. Then second thing is, how would I manage this? So the big debate that comes up a lot is over coordination. And so in that sense, this is probably the single most important figure is, why do people come to the office? They come to the office basically to meet with co-workers. So when you ask them, what are the top 3 benefits? Socializing with co-workers, face-to-face collaboration are the big ones. FaceTime with my manager is low. It is hard to get people to the office if their colleagues aren't there. My favorite, it's Sarah, right? You were at Google. Yeah, there was this great story about Google US had the Lizzo concert. Do you know about this Lizzo concert? So Google, I think it must only been the years. They hired Lizzo to come in like early 2021 to have a concert. And the idea is, well, Lizzo will come and everyone will come back to the office. And of course, everyone came back to the office to see Lizzo. They just went home again the next day. And so then there was like, what are we going to do? We're going to get like Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift and Katy Perry. Like, it's just like people, I mean, sure, you can get them in for one day with Lizzo. That was very effective, but they just go home again. And so basically people will come in to see their co-workers and collaborate with them, which then means if you're going to have hybrid, mostly companies, larger companies particularly, are going to either decide at the company level. So this, for example, it's Disney. So Disney say you want to come in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, work from home Friday, or have each team decide it. Turns out there's not a lot of difference between these two because of this. If you look at which days people want to work from home, Friday totally dominates. And after that, it's always Tuesday, Wednesday, and then it's really a choice between Monday to Thursday. It's like, I have in my mind this analogy of like bedtimes for 7-year-old kids. You say like, you can choose between 9 or 9:05, and it's like a fake choice. It kind of feels a bit like this with hybrid, like no one's going to come in Friday. So if you're giving people 3 days, you can kind of predict pretty much what they're going to be. But there's various flavors of it. I would say most companies, that's slightly more common, as I say, team by team you choose. They end up choosing the same 3 core days, more or less anyway. Enforcement is another issue. It was a real 2022 issue, slightly less 2023. So we surveyed both 500 senior managers and several thousand employees. And we asked them the same question, which is what happens when an employee stays home in office days? If you ask the senior managers, they say, they're like, get all tough, we threaten to terminate them. If somebody stays home when they're supposed to be in, that's a serious offense. Reduction in pay, there's a negative performance review, very serious consequential things will happen. When you ask individual employees, the most common answer is nothing. Like nothing happens at all. And so this is one of the other issues that's come up a lot, is just weak enforcement. I'll come on to this in a minute, but I think at this point, 2023 onwards, if you have anchor days, at this point, I would start enforcing it. So for employees, it's great to get to work from home a couple of days a week, but if you have anchor days, I don't know, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the reason is an econ term, there's like big negative spillovers. So let's say, the 6 of us are working in a team, and I stay at home. Say, I don't know, I'm cold, or it's snowing. It snowed today. I decided not to come in. There's a big negative spillover on everyone else, because then if you have a Zoom meeting with me, then you guys can meet in person, but you have to connect me in, and you have to go to a conference room. You can't meet. You can see it's kind of annoying. It's annoying to have one person. Or what you hear often happens, you say, well, let's just have the meeting without Nick. And then we can go and have it over lunch or in a room, or do it at our own pace. So because of that, enforcement's become quite important to try and get everyone on the same day. What are a few other things I see? A few other things I see is moving away from this to that. So this is kind of what I call library function for offices. So Stanford has universities have tons of libraries on campus, but none of the students take books out anymore. They're really busy. They use them as a quiet place to work. And that maybe is where offices were pre-pandemic. Most people now, they want to do quiet work, they just don't come into the office anymore. They're going to do it at home, or maybe a local cafe or something. Offices are much more now focused around this kind of thing, which is meeting space. These are soundproof Zoom cubicles. You want to put them in because if people do have Zoom calls, you want them not disrupting others. And without this stuff, they tend to go into meeting rooms. So I was talking to a company that has sensors for how many people in a room. They said it's amazing. You often find large meetings just has one person in it because they're taking a Zoom call and they block it out. So these things plus a bunch of meeting rooms is where a lot of offices are being redesigned to. So 3 other things I'll talk about, and then talk about impacts in the economy. So one is the importance of performance reviews. And again, links very much to, I mean, I've noticed in the pandemic, HR has become more, definitely more important post-pandemic because of A, impact on decision making because it relates to work from home, but B, because of this. So the best way to think about this is an anecdote, which is I spoke to Marissa Mayer. So I don't know how many people have heard of who Marissa Mayer is. So she's less well known in Sweden. So Marissa Mayer is famous in the US because she banned work from home in Yahoo in 2013. And there was a big storm in the media. And I interviewed her about 1.5 years ago. And she said, oh my God, that was a horrible experience. I was at a conference on a Monday and the person next to me said, you should see what's going on social media. You're being crucified. And Marissa was like, what do you mean? And turned out she'd had a memo about we want to stop working from home. It'd been leaked to the media over the weekend. It come out, there was massive negative attacks on Marissa Mayer. And so it was, bad few weeks. I think the problem was not her decision, was the PR. It was her PR. And I explained, so I asked her what happened. And she said, look, basically, when I took over Yahoo, we didn't have a very good performance review process. So you couldn't tell how well people were working. And so I started to put these in place. And in doing that, I discovered I have these group of people that were working fully remote. They're actually the team working on Skype. Sorry, not on Skype. Some kind of, they were trying to do something similar to Skype. They were a fully remote team in Yahoo. And I said, how can we tell what they were doing? And her team apparently said, well, we don't have any performance data on them. And she said, well, there must be something. I mean, we've got to be managing some way. And they apparently said, well, we have the logins for the laptops. You can tell how much they've been turning on the laptops. And Marissa said, okay, let's have a look at the data. And she said, when we looked at it, we discovered they hadn't logged in for 2 or 3. And I thought she was about to say hours at a time. She said some of them hadn't logged in for 2 or 3 weeks. And it's like 2 or 3 weeks. She's like, yeah, they probably had other jobs. I mean, it was just, and she said, look, the setup is when you're in the office, you can kind of see what people are doing. It's not great. It's like 5 out of 10 management. But are you sitting there, working? When I walk past, is it Excel or is it Champions League or whatever? There's kind of a rough sense that somebody's working. I'm not claiming this is particularly good management practices, but it's something. It's like a 5 out of 10. He said the problem is when people are remote, you have no way to tell what's going on. And so you need some form of performance management. And I've heard the story over and over and over again that when folks are working from home, even if it's 1+ day a week, you need some way of evaluating output. And then you can relax and say, if you're going to work from home, as long as you get your output done, if you want to go play golf for an hour during the day, that's fine. Or 2 hours during the day, that's fine. You just got to get your deliverables done, or make your performance. So performance reviews are one big thing that's picked up a lot. Second thing is video on during Zoom calls. So for really big Zoom calls I get, they're like broadcasts. You don't probably want your videos on. But when you interview people, you ask them, how does it affect your engagement if you have your video on? Typically, people say positively. Some say no impact, but a lot say positively, very positively. We also have some, how does it affect the engagement of others? We get the same thing. And so generally in 4 or 5 person meetings, second thing is have the videos on. Third thing is, I can talk about this later, but there's been more of a push towards software solutions to try and be more flexible. So more desk booking stuff, more flexible offices, to say, look, I'm, like one example is a company called Strava. Don't know if anyone uses Strava. It's like a run tracking thing and bike tracking. So yeah, Strava, weirdly enough, was founded by someone that used to be an assistant professor in economics. It was like I don't know any economist. It was the weirdest thing. He was in Stanford, and then he started up this software company, Michael Horvath. And then anyway, I think he's done pretty well since then. He didn't get tenure at Stanford, which is, I think we made a mistake. But so he said they closed down some of their offices. Now they just book space by the day. He said they had an office in Denver. It made no sense paying for it. They're only going in like every other week. They just closed it down and booked space. So this is another way just being more flexible. So I would say in terms of advice, in terms of hybrid, probably the first thing is coordination. So either at the team level or the company level, choose the same 2 or 3 days a week. Promote in-person meetings on those days so people feel like there's a reason to come in. The thing that pisses people off more than anything else is coming in to spend the day on Zoom. It's like super frustrating. So when people come in, make sure there's a reason. Suggest Zoom meetings, coffee office meetings on home days. I would get, not super tough, but a number of companies now are saying, look, if someone says they can't come in because, their kid is sick or there's some emergency, they should probably just focus on that. And we're not going to connect you in because it's disruptive at work. We'll take minutes. We'll let you know when you come in the next day. We'll bring you up to speed. And then probably for new hires, for folks in the first 1 or 2 days, maybe add an extra, first 1 or 2 years, maybe add an extra day for mentoring. This is a group that's particularly sensitive to have some time in the office. So finally, what about 2 impacts on the economy? Talk about 2 big impacts we've seen. One is the donut effect. So I have good data for the US. I have some MasterCard swipe data. I should probably put it up for various countries around the world, including I've seen this for Stockholm. So why don't I show you what I have, and then I'll tell you about the broader data. So in the US, we have amazing data for the United States Postal Service. So they have zip code level net change of address by month. And you can see really clearly that people have left the center of big US cities and moved out to the suburbs. So the intuition is really straightforward. I used to live in the center of New York because I had to go into Goldman Sachs 5 days a week. Actually, that's a terrible example because they're back to, okay, a normal bank. I had to go into, some other bank like Lazard's 5 days a week. Now they only require you in 3 days a week. Therefore, I don't need to live as far in, but I also maybe want some space at home. So a huge number of people moved out to the suburbs of the same cities. In other data, MasterCard, we've actually been looking at spending patterns around the world. You see a similar thing with expenditure on credit cards. Expenditure in city centers is down. Expenditure in the suburbs is actually up. So the suburbs of big cities have seen property booms. The city centers have not done so well. So one phenomena is people have moved out. The other phenomena, which is from a sport that I don't play, I just got asked about it so many times, I had to look into it, which was golf. So the number of people that told me golf stories. So what I'd hear over and over again is, golf courses are really busy. I'm not able to play golf, which I didn't have like huge amounts of sympathy for, but I heard it so many times. I thought it'd be interesting to see what's there in the data. So there's a Stanford undergrad called Alex Finnan that I was an advisee for, and I happened to have access to what's called the INRIX data, which is another amazing data set. So if you drive a car with GPS, even if you don't use the GPS, you're not navigating by, it's still active. And it will, in fact, we should check with how much, to what extent it's true for Volvo. I know this is true for American manufacturers. It transmits it back to the car manufacturer, and the car manufacturer anonymizes this stuff and sells it on bulk because it's quite useful. INRIX has this data for about 150 million journeys in the US a day. So it knows journey flows. We combine that with locations of golf courses, which are really easy to spot on satellite photographs because there's lots of thin green strips. And we define the game of golf as driving to a golf course spending between 2 to 6 hours there. Like, nobody walks to golf courses or bikes, not in America. And 2 to 6 hours gets rid of people that live next to them and gets rid of lunch. This is the pattern you see. So there's pre-pandemic, low playing, and then it picks up on the weekends. During the pandemic, it's basically pretty full all week. We have the hourly data. Pre-pandemic, people are playing golf before work, but then I guess, go into work after that. I'm not sure, they say there's bad traffic or something, so that's 9 a.m., but somehow they go into work. During the pandemic, it's basically jammed all day. The only reason apparently it drops here is in the south of the US. It's so hot, you cannot play in the middle of the afternoon. It's just too hot to play. I actually interviewed a bunch of golf managers, and just to kind of see if this is true, and they were saying things like, it's totally crazy. You cannot believe it. People are desperate to play golf. And one guy said, like 2 weeks ago, he had a storm, and golf courses are really at risk if there's lightning, that you get hit and electrocuted. And the guy was saying people were refusing to come off because they said, I've waited weeks to get this. There's no way I'm coming off. And so golf is completely exploded. This kind of links back to, in your mind, you should think the importance of performance reviews, because this stuff is telling you people like work from home for good reason. They like avoiding the commute. They like the fact they have the flexibility to do that. And I think that's fine. If I want to play golf maybe between 10 and 12 and work more in the evening, I think that's fine, but you want to make sure that's properly monitored. So what about the future? I put a piece out in The Economist predicting a Nike swoosh, and I think that's a relatively safe bet. Why? Because there are two. So just to be clear, we dropped early in the pandemic. We're in the flat bit now. In the long run, we're going to rise back up again. Why? There are two forces that are going to push up long run levels of work from home. So one is technology effects. So what's happened is the number of people work from home has gone up 4 or 5x, as we've talked about. It's meant that every hardware firm, software firm, venture capital company sees this as a huge market, and there's classic market size effects. In economics, this goes back to like Schumpeter in the 40s and 50s. So there's just much more profit for coming up with a new device. As a result, the rate of technological progress and work from home products has picked up, which is going to push it up in the long run. So I was actually at a dinner with some VCs about a month ago, and there was a company there claiming they're trying to develop literally this thing out of Star Wars. Yeah, I get Star Wars and Star Trek mixed, but three-dimensional holograms. The Apple headset and various other things that come out, I don't think that's a coincidence. It's clear that virtual stuff, you know, better work from home technology is going to start increasing. This is a figure from another research project. We scrape the 5,000 or so new patents that come out each week in the US Patent and Trademark Office for words around telework, remote work, etc. You can see once the pandemic starts, you start heading up. Some of this is lawyers, but some of it is, you know, a true acceleration of technology. So one is technology effects are going to make it better. The other is just what I call cohort effects. If you look at young firms, startups now, they tend to be much more remote focused. These companies and their CEOs are going to be, you know, the big CEOs we're going to hear on the news, and, you know, David Solomon's and Jamie Dimon's going to be in retirement. Elon Musk's are going to be retired, or, I mean, maybe, I guess, in 20 years' time. But there'll be a new, younger generation of people who are going to be grown up in their career with remote work. And I think they're not pushing for fully remote, but it's going to be a much more standard thing. So working from home is here to stay. It is typically 2 days a week for the average office worker. I don't be too prescriptive, and I'm sure we'll come up in discussion. There's no necessarily right or wrong answer, but I definitely think about it. Having people back 5 days a week when they don't need to is costly, and it's worth really thinking about what the benefits are. The main thing is when people come in, they should coordinate to come in on the same day. It's primarily the only reason to come in is basically to work with other people, and offices as such are designed more about less library function and more collaborative work function. Library function is kind of dying out, and it's much more collaborative function. And I'll stop and go from there. Thanks. Again, follow on. I'm happy to share the slides, and I'll try and put stuff up on LinkedIn. So.
Thank you. Please, we'll have a short Q&A, so you can start over there. And we will. All the slides are going to be available on our website afterwards. So what's your own setup? How much do you work from home?
I'm really weird, actually. I live on campus, so I'm hybrid, but in a particularly high frequency version. So this is probably not a good. I don't know anyone else does this actually, because I have a 5-6 minute commute sort of on campus, but because I'm on the West Coast, I dropped my youngest daughter off, just get back for 8, and then 8 is already 4 p.m. in Europe, and it's 5 p.m. It's 4 p.m. in the UK, 5 p.m. in continental Europe, and so I just have back-to-back Zoom calls typically until like 11:30, and then at that point things quieten down. I go in for lunch in the department, and in the afternoon we have a complicated school pick up and drop off. So, but I actually most days go in. Like, this is so much better in person. So I'm not like trying to claim everything is best remote. I mean, this, you know, for academics, doing work and looking at data and that kind of stuff works great at home, actually. But for other things like talking, so I tend to be hybrid most days. Actually, most days I go to work, but I probably spend only a third of my time in the office.
But has that changed since the pandemic, or did you?
Yeah, totally. Because everyone else, the weird thing I noticed in pandemic is a lot of companies say, it's interesting, leisure travel, by the way, is up, but business travel is quite a bit down. So if you look at airlines, business travel's up 30% down. It's because, it's because people are saying, well, like, it's much more normal to have a 20, if you're going to meet for an hour, why would you bother flying?
Right.
So I find it much easier to talk to people. I actually find it easier with co-authors on Zoom because you can both look at the same screen. So yeah, I think that seems to come the norm. I mean, I know the head of our department wants us in 2-3 days a week, which makes sense, and that's kind of where, I mean, academia actually is very aligned with the rest of the economy.
But so we had a brief discussion this morning about measuring output, and you mentioned that since, I mean, it's when people are at their desk and you're at the office, it's sort of easy to overview if people are working, even though it's hard to assess the quality. But what does this imply for organizations or operations where it's sort of hard to measure output?
I mean, I know there's been noticeably a big increase in emphasis and resources going to HR. So one thing is the performance review thing is need support from HR. The other thing interesting, I was having this discussion, it would be interesting if you found the same thing, is that real estate used to sit under the CFO.
Right.
Because real estate used to be a cost thing. How do I renew the lease and get this? Now real estate is now a hybrid decision. Like when I decide how many days, that affects real estate, and there are trade-offs. And so that's moved. So that's one thing I see. I mean, oddly enough, a lot of CEOs have been involved in this, less now, but in 2020, 2021, it was a lot of a CEO decision. Now they're mostly like, okay, fine, we're hybrid. Let's, CHR typically work out exactly, is it 2, 3, 4, how we roll the thing out. But there's been a huge change. Also for a lot of companies, it's affected them as a business. Like I spoke to, it's one of these 3 companies, Aubon Pan, Pret a Manger, or Panera Bread. It's like, I spoke to the board of one, you can imagine, they all do the same thing. They basically sell sandwiches. And they were saying the pandemics had huge effects on us, but it's about net zero. They said, if you look at consumer sales, it's collapsed in city centers and it's massively up in the suburbs. So people are working from home, they're going out to the suburb to buy a sandwich on a Friday. They're not doing it in the office. So the other thing is, they said the other half of our business is business catering. Said it's about flat, but no one's catering on Monday or Friday. They basically said sandwich sales are up like 60% Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but not on Monday, Friday. And so it's twisted a lot of business around. Golf courses are absolutely minting money, because for golf courses, their costs are unchanged, more or less. They're running 60% more games through it. Tennis, pickleball, gyms. I mean, I thought gyms were completely doomed in 2020. I thought this is just a horrible business. It's like enclosed. If there's any way you're going to catch COVID, it's in a gym.
Right.
And now, because it turns out people are using gyms throughout the day, they're actually they're really doing quite well.
Right.
And we should stop and go to the beer.
Any questions now for Nick? Yes, please wait for me.
I'm happy to take them in the panel as well, because
Probably can't wait.
I want to hit Hanna and Katarina.
Hi, my name is Patrick Tagersholt. I'm working with the industrial holding company. And just curious, 60% of people do not have the choice to work at home at all, basically. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And then you're saying that the worth, if we put the economic value of being able to work at home is at least 8%.
Yeah.
Will this mean that we will have a massive brain drain from the sort of the people that cannot work at home, that will now start to try to find employers that will let them work at home, because otherwise, they miss out on money or free time?
It's a great question. And I think you're exactly right. So again, I'm embarrassed I don't know the Swedish situation, so maybe someone knows the Swedish labor market better. In the US, what basically happened is almost exactly this. So if you walk around any shopping mall now, in like McDonald's or Abercrombie and Fitch or any basically $19.23 an hour type job, there's signs over all the store windows: help wanted, help wanted, help wanted. In fact, my kids are looking for summer internship. It was really easy to get thing in like Shake Shack. It was very hard to get a tech or a grad job. So what's happened is like Econ 101. So suddenly, if you have a graduate job, you've now got a perk that's worth 8%. So labor supply for that is pushed out. If on the other hand, you have a non-grad job that has to be face-to-face going in every day, every hour, it's become actually slightly less pleasant for a while because of wearing masks, infection risk, and labor supply is contracted. And what's happened is the wage rates kind of adjusted. So, I mean, it's an amazing thing. If you look in the US data from 1980 to 2019, there was a huge increase in inequality. So this is enormous increase in inequality, had massive political ruptures and led to, as part of what I think drove the Trump movement, et cetera. 1/4 of that, when you measure it by the college, non-college wage gap, was unwound from 20 to 23, which is really astounding, actually. And the reason I think a lot of that is work from home, because all of us enjoy work from home, and our labor supply is actually increased on average if you look at it, whereas people have contracted out, people that have frontline jobs. So oddly enough, what's happened, I think, is we as graduates have got this nice 8 to 10% work from home perk. And non-graduates have to go in every day, at least in the US, have got 8-10% increase in real earnings. But I don't know about Sweden. I'm not sure what's happened in Sweden, actually. I don't know if anyone knows. I'm sure there are people here that know the Swedish labor market, but I don't know if inequality is compressed. But it has in the UK as well. The UK has seen a similar phenomenon to the US. So the labor market has kind of undone that in a way that I think is, I mean, it's good. Actually, that's good news. We don't want higher inequality.
So I think we'll ask our HR wizards to join us on stage. So please help me welcome Hanna Fager, Chief People Officer at Volvo Cars, and Katarina Berg, Chief Human Resources Officer at Spotify. We're so happy to have you here. Hanna, we'll start with you. Volvo Cars is if not the, at least one of the largest employers in Sweden. What's your approach to on-site versus other types of work?
Yeah, first I would like to give a bit more nuance. We are not only manufacturing, but around 50% of our employees are working as operating factories. And that means that that's a work that fits for those people who actually want to know when they start, when they can go home, and normally they work to live. On top of that, our biggest group of employees are engineers. And we have around, I would say, 21,000 white collars globally. And the approach that we have taken is that we didn't close down totally during pandemic in those countries where we didn't need to do that. We learned so much from China during the pandemic, the early pandemic, so we actually could keep people safe at the workplace to keep production running. And we have an approach that says that we should be together. We are innovating new products, and we are a one product company. So we have 43,000 people working in 34 countries, everything coming together in one product. So we have collaboration is key in our culture. So we say that we have an office first policy, but we are hybrid. So that is something that the teams agree about, how they best structure work. But what we say is when we are together is when we really can get quality from being together, when we innovate, when we meet, when we collaborate. And I definitely have the responsibility for real estate. And I think something that is important is to be located where it's also attractive for people to come to. So the workplace has definitely been affected. But so we have an office first policy, but we offer hybrid work, and that is up to the team to decide.
So about this comment about enforcement, how do you enforce your office first policy?
I think it's quite clear. It has been so obvious for everyone that we need to come together. We work also in a very structured matrix in terms of line and program, core programs or other type of programs. So the dependency outside your closest team is so needed during a workday, and you have so many different interactions that it's value adding to interact with other people, both online and in physical environments. So we have not been very harsh. We have been quite humble, I must say, and human-centric. We tried at once when we were in a pandemic phase to say that now it's time to come back, and it was a massive negative feedback. So we said, okay, we talk more about what do we want to achieve, and how to get there needs to be up to each team. Because, I mean, for all people, it is not the wanted. So I think we talk about hybrid being the thing. I think there is also a lot of people actually want to know, when do I start work? When do I go home? Like to be at work. So I think we need to look at, I mean, in the human-centric way, which I think many Swedish companies are very good at doing, understanding that there are differences in the needs that we have, and that we need to delegate that to the teams to decide.
Right. So speaking of differences, Katarina, tell us about Spotify's concept, work from anywhere.
Yeah, so I think it was 5 years before pandemic, Daniel, our founder, CEO, my boss, started to talk to me about distributed first as a concept. And he thought we would all move to that, and it would be much easier to attract people, also, you know, keep tenure longer. I didn't think back then, which is like 7 years from now, right? I didn't think management, I didn't think maybe even employees or band members would be ready for that. Bam, we got the pandemic and we were all forced to go home. Hey, maybe cheating, being Spotify in that sense that we've been digital from the get-go. So everybody had the tools, we worked like that. We didn't have to do any transformation into tools and ways of working and all that. And then we kept asking in dialogue with our people during pandemic, what works, what really works, what's not working. And we got as many answers as employees. But there were two things that they all said. When we come back from this curse, there is a blessing too. Don't take away the freedom, don't take away the flexibility. So then I asked Anna and Alex in my team, like, can we put a program together, which is the Spotify Work From Anywhere program? And we looked into everything that we could do, everything that we wanted to do, and also the things that it's easy to hide behind, not to launch a program like that. So for instance, there is no insurance that will cover you if you want to be a serious employer for more than 90 days. Then you have to go back where your mailbox is. So you could go like, oh, we can't really do work from anywhere because, right, you have borders, the contract is usually then covering you labor law wise. So we wanted to also make sure. So we found a way where we could launch this March 2020, where we put some guardrails in, so we could be that kind of type of employer, and where we have an entity they can move. So it's more like less, to be very transparent and very honest, which we are obviously are to our people, is it's work from anywhere right now. It's not work from anywhere. And it's not Spotify that puts those guardrails. It's actually the things so we can protect our people so they feel safe when it comes to, as I said, and taxes. So for instance, in the US, you can move from, most people were in the biggest office that we have in New York. So if they have an office mix, they will still go to that office. They could actually go to another office today. They can move to Miami or to Chicago or to LA. If they choose the home mix, which 49% has today, they never come in, right? Then they move, most people moved home to where they have their relatives or where they feel safe. It was also easy for us then to start to recruit much more diverse into communities like Atlanta, where we never ever were able to recruit people because they didn't want to move. They keep their salary, contradicting your advice. They're keeping the salary, the benefits, and again, it's for us also connected to the strategy of maybe being one of the only kind of high-tech companies that are in the tech corridor called Boston, New York, and also one Stockholm. We are not in the Valley. We're not in the Bay Area. So staying relevant and still not competing with the highest salary, but having a program of our own.
Interesting. So a question to both of you. Have you noticed any differences regarding preferences for like either in on-site work or remote for, say, different genders or different markets where you operate? Would you like to?
Yeah, so again, we kept asking the question. So we check in with all the people, and in dialogue with them, we have changed and tweaked the program. We also were very humble when we launched it, said like we and everybody else in the research, there's like hundreds of years of people coming into office and kind of knowing what to expect. Productivity is not one of the things that we do measure, because we see that in the footprint of most people are doing actually, you know, coding and how much code do you deploy and things like that. But there were a couple of other things that we wanted to watch really careful. What happens with mental health? What happened with the energy when you actually come into the office and see somebody in the eye, and what does that do for your health? Collaboration, does it go up and down? And then obviously that has something to do with efficiency. And then the two other things that is part of our DNA, creativity and innovation, will that go up or down or stay flat? So very data informed companies. So we measure all of that, but not the productivity and efficiency, which everybody is telling us, why are you not doing that? But it has to do with a couple of things, right? First of all, we can measure that anyway. So in one way we do, but we are not fair. The other thing we saw during pandemic, productivity went up because people need purpose in life and they couldn't do anything else. And maybe binge watching, you know, Netflix for a week was fun, but then you had 2.5 more years of pandemic. So people were working, right? So that actually stressed us that they worked all hours instead of working the hours. So again, also, I think it comes back to the philosophy of what type of employee you want to be. We are very trust-based. We are very value-driven. We want to make sure that they actually go offline and not work all the time. So the Marissa Mayer kind of thing, and when talking to her too, we're like, oh, we don't see that people are not using the tools, the phones and the computers. They are actually spending too much time there. So these are the things. The biggest tweak we have done to the program is this, and I think you had it on your chart too, is the people that don't know what it is to actually go to work, meaning the new graduates. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know what's expected of them. So we're tweaking the program now. If you get a job at Spotify, we're actually asking you to have for the first year, or we actually decided for you that you will have an office mix for the first year, because it doesn't help them. They also get very insecure. They don't perform the way that we know that they could. And it's not necessarily to be with their team and the manager, because their team and the manager can have a home mix. It is to be around other co-workers. So they understand, and also we do understand that they might have another employer future down the line in their career. So trying to set them up for a long success. I think that is the biggest change that we have seen since we launched the program. Women tend to do more home mix than men. The people that has children have more home mix and office mix. And then depending on what type of job you have, you could also see like you see finance, you see HR, the people that actually work and support other people, since 60% still have a home office mix, come in to work more. And then, of course, the people that actually works in the reception, they all come in to work because that's where the job is. But we are not mandating anything. We have anchor days, but that is up to the teams. And then people come in. And then sometimes we do things that I think everybody is on to. So we do most of our listening sessions. That is when big bands come in and play. It's usually on Friday, which means that people come in on Friday, and so on and so forth.
What about at Volvo Cars? Do you see differences?
We don't measure. We didn't want to go into that rabbit hole because I saw a big risk actually that people felt monitored. What has come through very clear is people want to have an autonomy. They want to have a flexibility. They want to feel trusted. I mean, that's a core value I think many companies are sort of taking as the starting point for this. So what we see is that in average people are in around 3 days a week, which I think is totally fine. And since we have such a visible product that the majority of our employees actually contribute into, it's a bit hard to launch without a front seat or a back door or something like that. So I mean, the dependency is so built into our company, which is a big benefit, I think. So we choose to not go in to make sure that people didn't feel monitored. So we don't either measure, I mean, individual productivity, but we have a performance process, of course, and you have certain deliverables that you're measured on that you do in contact then to other teams. So we don't know exactly who and in what ages, but what we can see is that we have recruited a lot of people during the pandemic when people have been more remote. Right. And there we need to start to onboard them again to understand what team have they come to, what do the culture actually look like within our company, how are we best when we are together. And I agree with Katarina, it's not so much about your direct manager or your direct team. It's rather the benefit of feeling that you're part of something much, much bigger. Because in those connections is also where you find your next step. I mean, you build your network, find a lot of the joy and to see that you're part of something so much bigger than your close by sort of surrounding. So we don't measure, but people are in average in around 3 days per week.
So Nick, any comments on what you've heard? Sounds very well managed, everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a huge variety of what, I totally agree. I mean, one thing to point out is, I think we were talking over dinner last night, if you survey folks, 20% want to be fully in person, 30% want to be fully remote, and 50% want to be hybrid. So there's clear variation across employees. The only thing to coordinate, and it sounds like I think we're kind of aligned, is if you're going to have people come in, you want them to come in on the same day. The one thing that irritates employees is being forced to come in and finding other co-workers aren't there because they're like, what the heck is the point of people loathe coming to spend all day on Zoom? And I completely align that coming in, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it sounds like the first year, this is what you hear a lot, people in the first year want to learn. It's interesting you mentioned the things they hear they want to learn. It's like, when do you start work and stop work? How does this software work? In fact, one of my former students, she started at, I better not name the company actually, because well, she started at a very large tech firm, and she was saying she was fully remote and she didn't even know what hours people are working. And she was like working some software product, and her manager said, I can't believe it's taking that long. And it turned out she just didn't know it because if someone had been over her shoulder, they would have seen. And so I am totally aligned. I mean, the main thing at this point in 2023 is just being thoughtful. 2020, 21, 22 are somewhat chaotic in getting stuff. And like, we're worried about social distancing and stuff, but I mean, in both cases, you have some mix of in-person and at home, which is where things are heading.
But I think also to what Katarina said there about the mental health. And I mean, what we have gone through has, of course, affected us as people. So I think, I mean, to do this more strengthened health talk tools, and I mean, really help leaders to be observant, and also as colleagues that we are observant on each other. Because, I mean, if we work in a trust-based way, I mean, most people go to work because they want to create meaning and, I mean, contribute into something. Those that don't work, they didn't work before either. I think they were the ones that just sat by their desk behind their computer. So I don't think that people have all of a sudden became lazy or not attached to what they do at work. But what I do think is, I mean, to care, really care, have become something that is very important. And that's something that we see also appeals people, like well-being. What is our take on well-being? How do we care about people? And I think also, I mean, the feeling of autonomy is something that is very important for people. That's why it's so highly ranked also when they apply for a job. I were in US last week and I heard a guy saying, yeah, if we don't actually promote that we are offering hybrid work, we will not get any applicants. So, I mean, it has becoming important, an important signal of what type of culture you have at your company, I think. But also work location, I think, has becoming very important in terms of understanding where do we need to be located to actually be relevant for people. Because quite many have changed their way of living and maybe bought a house, lived in a central flat before and so on. So it's a lot of different wishes and wants that you need to sort of decide who are you as a company and why are we located where we are and what consequences will that get?
Right. So I'm interested to hear about you guys. So we have another Menti question where you're asked to answer what's your organization's policy for working remote? So you should answer how many days a week you're working remote. And the last option is if it's fully optional or fully remote.
Hanna, the point you made, again, just to reinforce something you said earlier that I hear a lot, which is, in terms of office space, what companies are trying to keep is nice office space. So the thing that's been really, in office space is like class A, B, and C, and what's really suffered is low quality office space in city centers. Because the story is that people are going to come in for 2-3 days a week, they want to come into something that's nice. Yeah. So it turns out really horrible office space is in real trouble, but nice high-end office space actually seems to be doing.
Okay, so let's see the results. Okay, yeah, well, it seems like you're following your advice, Nick, to 2 days a week or 3 days a week.
No, it's not my advice. You know, I'm a data person. I'm like reporting everything.
And so the next question is, if your organization has designated in-office days, on which days are they? Because I'm interested, you came back.
We were saying over dinner, hilariously, this varies a lot by country. So the two variations I've heard is someone in Holland was saying in Holland, primary schools stop early on Wednesday. And so that's quite a popular day. And then in Australia, apparently Friday's a popular day to come to the office because people want to go out and drink after work. And it's a lot easier. So apparently in bars, I saw another thing I saw is that some MasterCard data showing that basically in New York, they've seen much more business in evenings than at lunchtimes. And particularly Friday lunchtime is really quiet and Thursday evenings become really popular because it's clear that people are basically going out drinking on Thursday evenings.
But you mentioned Tuesday through Thursday a couple of times. Is that just like randomly what people seem to prefer, or is there like any other?
There's another really interesting trajectory. So when I first started, I had a lot of discussions from like kind of May 2020 onwards. Early on, I'd be interested in the same as Volvo. Well, Spotify, you were fully remote, but for Volvo, early on, what happened? A lot of companies were like, "Don't get used to it. You're going to come back." And then when they said hybrid, they deliberately didn't have both days adjacent to the weekend to prevent long weekends. So if you remember the Apple plan originally, actually Apple abandoned it, was Wednesday, Friday. And so a lot of people say, we're never going to let you do either Thursday, Friday or Monday, Friday, because we don't want long weekends. But the labor market's been so strong. And because basically this kind of trust and performance has actually turned out to be pretty good. At some point now, firms have said, look, fine, have Monday, Friday. Take long weekends if you like, just get your job done. And it's so actually, let's see what we can. But Monday, Friday have gained in popularity.
So a lot do not have any designated office days. So it's pretty random. Because when you talk about hybrid, it seems like you mean that a hybrid setup is that you spend some days working from home and also like when you're in the office, you're in together. Because I think a lot of us might think that hybrid is that 2 people in the team are at home and 3 people are in the office. Is it important that on the days you actually spend in the office, your entire team is there? So it's not this hybrid in the sense that.
Well, I mean, I'll go to Katarina and Hanna, but I mean, it depends who you work with. So again, going to the I couldn't pronounce it in Swedish, but Sarah's, you know, you're saying like you had a business team and a sports team and an entertainment team in the newspaper. They're not working with each other. It doesn't really matter whether you come in or not. Like I don't work with the history department, but if it was two colleagues I work with a lot, then it would matter they came in on the same day.
I think that is where we struggle. I mean, I still feel that, I mean, a lot of people comes in, they call into team meetings. I mean, there is a behavioral change that needs to happen with a certain, maybe more speed than so far. But I think it's complex when you have a lot of colleagues that you want to interact with during a day, and people do not plan for the time that it takes to go between buildings. And we have quite an office space in some of our locations where it actually takes time to transport yourself to different parts. So then people take the easy one out and take a Teams link because it is always a Teams link there. So then we miss out on that. So I think for us, that is still to really make it value adding when you're in, that you really feel that, okay, then is when I have this nice time meeting up with Katarina, I can take a coffee before, have lunch together. So I think that is where we try to find it out. But for us, it has been more, because what we have seen from other companies is when you're very strict what days it is from sort of corporate level or central level in a quite large company, I think it is that people feel sort of trapped a bit, and that someone decides for a freedom that I'm valuing very high. So we have tried to not be that saying it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We'd rather say it's up to you and your team. Maybe for 4 weeks, you need to be in 5 days a week because you have so much to do together. Right. So more purpose-based.
Well, that's the most common. So just to be clear, there are some companies that do company level like Disney, but the more common is team by team.
Yeah, but I mean, Apple got an enormous negative reaction.
Apple have banned. Well, Apple on the positive side, Apple plan was early, so they were early. So most of these early plans went by the wayside. But yeah, they're no longer doing that anymore.
So do we have any comments or questions from the audience? Yes, please wait for microphone.
Hi, so now I'm still Anna, but I used to be CEO of Kivra, so I think that's my biggest experience is this part, which is the Swedish scale-up, I think known for most people here. And I had two comments. One was the wage bill part. I saw in 2019, when we let some people work from the forests in Småland and so on, we could actually say you can get 15% lower salaries because it's so much cheaper to live there. But in 2022, they could as well work in the Bay Area from Småland. So then it was more expensive having the people out in the forests in Sweden. So I think it's a huge learning of the sort of global economy. And Sweden is really sort of a low-cost labor market. I'm involved in a startup in the Bay Area now, and we put all research and development in Gothenburg because it's so cheap. So I think for Sweden, maybe no cost savings on advanced, like skilled developers. But then I think also from a CEO perspective, I felt it was, and I think it's not so much discussed, that this sort of innovation in terms of, we were only 150 people. So normally I bumped into everybody in the office. I got a lot of new ideas, like new features, products and so on, that all these sort of cross-functional teams and so on. And I think for people in the same level, you maybe call each other easily. But as for a CEO, we try to have these sort of donut coffees, like you just randomly have coffee with everybody, but you don't get spontaneously ideas because it's sort of these really hierarchies, even though you think it's no hierarchies in a modern Swedish organization. So it's super difficult to get all the good things going. It's not that you sort of get a good idea and it's randomly called the CEO that you never actually met in person. So I think that's a part which is not so much discussed. It's a lot of sort of organized innovation processes, but not a spontaneous brightness happening when people just bump into each other.
So what have you seen at Spotify and Volvo Cars?
I think that is true. But for us, one of the things that we said when we launched Work From Anywhere was this. As soon as we got big enough to be on 2 floors, we were dispersed, or we were like a distributed company. As soon as we had 2 offices, we were. As soon as we were in 45 different cities, and as soon as we were from Sydney to LA in all time zones, we were. That was one other thing. The other thing we said, work is something you do. It's not a place you come into. Okay, so if that is the backdrop, if we always been kind of a bit disruptive and also innovative company, what do we now do to make sure that we don't drop that? So this spontaneous bumping into each other, of course, but were we doing that at large? So for us, it's more of creating that kind of culture where a good idea is a good idea, whoever comes up with it. So it's not like the smart people or the kind of the design team or a bit more of the creative team. It's like everybody should have a structure. The other thing it was that I think what we struggle with more than keeping that is actually the kind of the community experience, right? How do we get social with each other when everybody is everywhere at every time, and we give them the freedom and flexibility that they're screaming for? Is back to maybe the Gen Z question of, I don't want to come into an office, but I want you to have an office. You're like, okay, how does that equation, right? But it does in so many ways. So I think the cracking of the code for us is not so much, okay, should we save costs? Should we get off the capex when it comes to all our offices, or can we lower the wages or anything like that? Like, you keep that in your entity. So if you have a New York salary, you keep that when you go to Atlanta. If you have a Stockholm salary, you keep that when you move to Skövde. That is like totally fine with us because it drives the other things. But how do we make sure that we come together as a community? The smaller communities within the community of Spotify, but also how do we evolve the culture now when everybody is actually logging on whenever they want, right? How do you do that? So I used to have a social team, then we had a people experience team. That team actually now is Community X team. How do we make sure that we create something that has that social glue and also, you know, connecting tissue, where we believe then the bet is from that innovation comes. So yes, we have the structured things as spike days and, you know, hack weeks and all that. But how do we do that in the day-to-days? And that is more of social kind of arenas that are both digital, but also come alive. How do we do the anchoring days, or how do we the core weeks with your team? So trying new things and not, if it's not like spiking, like on all cylinders of the first time, it's like, it's not that it's not working. It's like, we have not worked in the world like this for that many months and years. So we have to go back to the data sets of, this is not maybe, we need to tweak, we need to iterate, and not do what we usually do. Go back to the chosen truth. It worked much better before. That's not coming back. We're not going to bring people in every day. So we need to find out, and I think it's very much in a humble dialogue with your people. And it's not necessarily HR that will come with all the solution, for sure not the executive team, right? You have to be in that dialogue with your people. And the things that work for Spotify does not work necessarily for Volvo cars, but we can steal and we can get inspired from each other, and then go like, okay, we can nick and here you can share a couple of things. But our people, our job, the tools we have, the program, it's for our people, and then we kind of develop that together with our people. So I think that is kind of our solution to a couple of things. And sometimes go like, when people are, how do we do this? We don't know. We actually don't know. You tell us. But we're going to try these things, right? And sometimes like, are you asking everybody to come back? No, only the persons that actually graduated yesterday and have their first job. And we do that for them. Again, not a control function. We have seen that they actually are in pain. They are totally confused. So it's about managing their expectations and setting them up for success. That is the driver to bring them into an office mix. So I think
I agree. And I also think, I mean, having different companies to interact with. Every time I talk to you, I feel, okay, good, Spark, maybe we can try that. Because
vice versa. Yeah.
Because I really like what you say. I mean, we cannot sit and have the truth on everything, and definitely not the HR team, even if I like your trust in the HR team. But I think, I mean, dare to let people try out things that works for them, and also dare to go back and say, no, this didn't work, we do like this instead, and now for a period this works for us. I think the flexibility goes both ways. I mean, people want flexibility, we will give them, but we will also require flexibility to try certain things. So I think it is to your point, I really see what you said also, because I think the Swedish culture of leading companies, I think we are less hierarchical. I think we are very human-centric normally in our cultures. And I think that helps us to spark ideas in different ways. And I mean, not needing to go 7 level ups through different committees and things like that. So I think in general, if I compare to many other cultures, I think the Swedish culture is very human. And I think that helps us to also see where the good ideas actually can be catched and also grow in bigger extent.
Nick predicts a Nike swoosh. What do you two envision for the future for remote work or hybrid work?
First of all, it would be stupid to say that you don't believe in that when you have somebody that's looked into all these data sets. So obviously he's right. But I think there is one. but I think one thing that actually speaks for that too, that we usually don't talk about, in leadership roles, but not in HR too. There is one thing that also keeps everything moving in a very smart way. If you are a trust-based company, it's peer pressure, right? So if you have teams and they work really well, nobody will be quiet if you put a culture in where people dare to speak up. So I'm not going to do Hanna's job if she's like skiving off and only playing golf. But I would actually really enjoy that she is playing golf if she carries her load. And that peer pressure is also a performance system. So it doesn't have to go, hey, we have this 9-fielder and like back to IBM model and everybody needs you and you have to like be in at 8. And it's much more, it's a better moral if you come in early than you stay late. All those chosen truths are out the door if you think about it and you dare to go like, you need to do your thing. But the team will put that pressure and not necessarily the company needs to do that. And that pressure is much harder because it's actually a colleague that you don't want to let down rather than your manager saying like, where were you this morning? Or when you come in at 10, you go like, do you have the afternoon paper with you? I mean, we all had those jobs when people said that, right? You came in at 8 and that was not as nice as 7:30. You go like, oh, sorry, for fudge's sake, right? It does not, but it's not like that anymore. And that peer pressure, don't underestimate that instead of going like, we're going to have templates and we're going to measure you when you, no. The team will make sure that the person that is never turning on their computer for 2 weeks are not necessarily part of the team going forward.
Hanna, what do you think about the future?
The swoosh.
The swoosh. No, but I think personally, I think it is to role model the flexibility and the trust, and especially from leadership. I think it's so encouraging when especially actually, I would like to say, my male colleagues are saying, no, why do we have this breakfast? I rather eat a long breakfast with my kids instead. That we need to stand up for how we distribute our time to actually show that the life balance will continue to be very important for people, because I think that is what we see. People are not willing to give up what is important for them or me to actually have quality in life. And I think we had the opportunity to breathe some new air. Maybe people played a bit more golf. I'm a tennis and paddle player, so I definitely know how easy it was to book night time before the pandemic, and now people are back into more normal patterns. But I think it is important to be there, to be in the handball cafe at 3 o'clock a Friday. When I do that, I feel like a role model rather than, oh, have I escaped from work? So I think senior leaders need to role model that you can have life quality, what that now means for you. Having older parents, being able to spend time with them, being on parental leave. So I think this human way of driving companies starts actually with taking care of myself, then being able to take care of others, then I can take care of the company. So for me, that is sort of the take for what will be important for the future. I think we have become very close to our values.
That's an excellent concluding remark. So I just want to thank the three of you and thank all of you and welcome our CEO back on stage.
Yes, and actually I also only want to thank our speakers, Gabriella and Emily, and all of you who have spent the day here with us today. And I hope that you will continue doing so and continue the conversation outside here over some drinks and something to eat maybe. And of course, this is our first conference of this kind, but it will be annual. So I hope that you will all come back to SNS, of course, before that. But in a year's time, we will now start planning the next conference in this Making Better Use of Research series. But thanks a lot for today.